like to extend a warm welcome and good day to everyone that's on this webinar. My name is Derek Melber, and for myself and everyone at ManageEngine, we just want to thank you for your time and your ability to spend a little bit of time with us to talk about how we can really ensure security even some of our Windows servers that are on the network. Today we're going to be talking specifically about how we can harden our configurations in Active Directory in our Windows servers, specifically with regard to our passwords, authentication protocols, and access to resources. Just as a little bit of background on who I am, again, my name is Derek Melber, and I am the technical evangelist for the Active Directory Solutions team here at ManageEngine. And my responsibility is to go around the world really helping organizations and administrators better understand Active Directory and hopefully produce solutions that make your environment more secure and hopefully make you more efficient with the tasks you need to do. I am a long-time Microsoft MVP. I've been back and forth between group policy and Active Directory for about the last 16 years. Currently I am over on the Active Directory side as in giving me as well as you insight into Active Directory and really the Microsoft team that deals with Active Directory themselves. I was just at Ignite last week in Atlanta, Georgia, which is Microsoft's big technical conference, seeing a lot of the new things which are very exciting that Microsoft's coming out with, a lot of cloud-based information, which I think is pretty exciting that we also have solutions for. We don't have a ton of time together today, but I want to leave you with some resources that will allow you to, after we're done here, be able to get more information. So a couple of the resources that I want to point you to, both of them are on our webline resources, and I want to point you to these before we get going here. If you go to our website, which is here, ManageEngine.com, and you first of all click on this community link. The community link will send you over to a place where you can have a drop down for blogs and then Active Directory. And this is our Active Directory blog that we update every single week. And we always talk about something that we feel is important to administrators and organizations. A lot of these blogs are actually related to questions that I get from people around the world in seminars. For example, I'm here in Stockholm this week talking at our user conference here in Stockholm tomorrow and the next day. And so a lot of these things are helpful little tidbits that can help you better administer your environments. So this is a great place for you to go to get information. And then really related to today's topic is our security hardening site. Now if you go to our main landing page, again, ManageEngine.com, and you just click on Active Directory, you'll see a drop down up here. And in the lower right hand corner you see the security hardening for Active Directory. The security hardening for Active Directory is an amazing resource for you, giving you insight first of all into kind of what Microsoft feels as their security platform moving forward, which down here you'll see just in time and just enough access, JIT and GIA. And if you actually watch the video, you'll get insight into how that's actually configured. But we feel at ManageEngine, especially the Active Directory team, that this might be a little bit too much for most organizations. So what we have done at the bottom of this page is giving you step-by-step guides on how to secure these areas. And the whole idea of securing these areas really wraps around the idea of security hardening. And with regard to this concept of security hardening, you know, we feel that it's important for you to understand what security hardening is and really the correct ways to harden your environment. So what we're going to do is we're going to start off talking about traditional security hardening, and then we're going to move on and talk about what we feel is really the generation today, the next generation ability to harden your environments. And then we're going to walk through 3 examples, giving you step-by-steps for 3 examples on how to do that. And if you take these 3 examples and the next generation security hardening concepts, and then you go to that security hardening site and put the principles that we're going to teach you here today in place for all of those areas, that's where you really can get really deep and confident security for Active Directory and your Windows servers. So what do we mean by traditional security hardening? Well, traditional security hardening is the idea that we need to ensure that our Windows machines are correctly configured. So how do we do that? Well, let's just take a project-based approach to this. Let's say that you are tasked by the boss to secure all of the Windows machines. So on the first day of the month, you calculate how many Windows servers you have, and let's say that you have around 1,000 Windows servers. So you have 1,000 Windows servers, and your job is to go in and make sure that those Windows servers are correctly configured for security. So in order to do that, first you have to generate reports. So you generate reports on all of the different security settings on all of the 1,000 servers. Then once you get the reports, you analyze what you have. So you need to make sure that based on compliance regulations, internal requirements, company guidelines, that all of these configurations are correct. And if they're not correct, then you have to move to step 3 so that they're correct. So you start on the first day of the month, you report, analyzed, and configure, and by the last day of the month, you have analyzed and configured all the settings on all 1,000 servers, and on the last day you're done. And you walk away knowing that Active Directory and your Windows servers are secure. But there's a problem with this method, and the problem is on the last day of the month, yes, things are correct. But what about 5 days into the next month? What about 2 months beyond the end of your project? Obviously, what's going to happen is things are going to drift. So traditional security hardening really gets things into a secure state, but we stop. And once we've completed the task, we move on. And really what we feel is you shouldn't just move on, you need to take additional action. And that additional action is what we feel is the next generation security hardening. And you will notice that the first 3 steps are the same. So we're not saying that reporting, analyzing, and configuring is wrong. We're saying it's the foundation for good security hardening. However, if you just stop after the configuration point, how do you know that you're still secure? Well, you don't, unless you monitor and alert. So now think about this. All 1,000 servers that you just secured, what you're going to do is you're going to set up the ability to track any of those security settings you put in place if they change. So that's the monitoring piece. Because the monitoring is nothing more than a log, in order for you to get reports from a log, that's going to take you time, manual effort. So what we also suggest is that when a security setting changes that's extremely important to your organization, you should receive an alert that that change occurs. And that alert comes from the monitoring logs. So now, at the end of the month, when you have everything secured, all you do is set up monitoring and alerting. And if you don't receive any emails from the alerts, you know that your security is still in place. This is the next generation security hardening. This is vital because we know that we have security drift. Settings just drift over time. But we need to know why those settings drift, and we need to make sure that we understand if they do change, if they're a good change or not. So what we feel is you just don't want to look at a point in time for security at the end of the month. We want you to look at security over time. So how do we establish this? How do we correctly get all of these things in place? Well, if I would go back to this particular diagram, you will notice that we have 5 steps. Each of these 5 steps is important to the overall process. So each step along the way is vital. So what I want to do is I want to walk through 3 examples. Again, if you go to security, all the security areas. And if you follow those security areas, you'll be able to do all 5 of these steps with each of those security areas. So how do you accomplish this? It's really not as complex as it might seem. So let's just first of all take passwords, okay? Now, with regard to passwords, in Active Directory and for our domains, now if I jump over here into my Active Directory environment, you will see that I have Active Directory here, and this is a live Active Directory domain controller. And in order for us to see report on our password policy, we have to know exactly how to do this. Now, if we really think about the password policy in Active Directory, when we install Active Directory, a password policy is already in place. Now that password policy may not be the best password policy, and we may want to update that password policy to be a little bit more secure. So how do we correctly report on the password policy for Active Directory? Now, the reason that I start with the passwords and the password policy is because I've seen many, whether it be auditors, security professionals, even though the concepts haven't changed in 16 years, I still find that many don't know how to correctly report on the password policy. So if you today, when you generate reports for your password policy, if you're going to Administrative Tools, Group Policy Management, and then you click on the Default Domain Policy, Settings, and then under your Security Settings, you take a screenshot of this password policy, I'm unfortunately here to tell you that this doesn't tell you anything. When you look at the settings report of a group policy object, you are simply looking at the contents of a file. And there is no guarantee by looking at this view that these settings are in place. So running reports on GPO settings is not a good approach for evaluating security. Now I know that's kind of a shock to some of you, but this is not the correct password policy for the domain. You need to make sure that you're getting the correct information. Because if I go back here and we look at our diagram for reporting, analyzing, and configuring, what is the most important piece of the 5 steps? Well, it's the reporting. If you don't run the right report, then you're adding information. So we need to make sure that we run the right report. What is the right report? How do we correctly report on the password policy? Well, Microsoft has a built-in command for us. If we go to a tool called SecPol, SecPol.msc, this is a built-in tool in every single Windows version that's out there. And SecPol gives you a view of the actual settings that you have in place. So you'll notice above here was our GPO report, and down below are the actual settings. And our password policy is poorly set up. So if we were to think that we had these settings in place, they may meet compliance regulations and everything else. But in reality, we're allowing users to have blank passwords. So as you see here, even at the very first step, you have to make sure it's to run. So in this case, with the password policy, we can run SecPol, SecPol.msc, and we can actually view the correct settings. So that's step 1, run the correct report. Now, we also have to understand the technology that we're looking at in order to analyze the information. Now, if I go into my group policy environment, and you see here, first of all, my Active Directory structure. You see that I have HR, IT. So let's say that I go into group policy, and I go down here to, let's say, my IT and OU. And let's say that in my IT OU, I create an IT password policy GPO. Now in this IT password policy GPO, I decide to come into my Windows settings, my security settings, my password policy, and I decide 18 character minimum password length for IT. So you'll see that I have this in place. And then if I come over and look at Active Directory, I have some users in here. I have Adam and I have Danny, and then I have Help Desk and Audit and some service accounts. So my question to you is, if I go into Group Policy and I link a GPO with a password policy in it to an OU, what would be the resulting password policy for these users? Well, it's not going to be the settings in this GPO. Okay? Now I was in, where was I 2 weeks ago? I was in, gosh, I don't even remember now. I was in Europe somewhere, and someone was trying to convince me that this actually works. Unfortunately, it doesn't work this way. You can only have one password policy in a single Active Directory domain using group policy. And let me say that again. You can only have one password policy in an Active Directory domain using group policy. And that's going to be the policy that controls that's linked to the domain level. We get that information by running secpoll.msc. So this is part of this analysis piece. We have to understand how the technology works and the scope of what we're looking at in order for us to actually evaluate the settings. So one password policy per domain using group policy. But Microsoft gave us a secondary technology called fine-grained password policies. Fine-grained password policies are configured using add-cedit, and you update the password settings container. Now, you don't have to use add-cedit anymore if you have a Windows Server 2012 R2 environment. Microsoft has actually given you a graphical interface for fine-grained password policies as long as you have a main controller running the latest and greatest operating system. Now, fine-grained password policies came out in Windows Server 2008. So there was a huge gap from which Microsoft didn't have an interface for these particular configurations. So now the question becomes, how do we report on fine-grained password policies? Well, we can have multiple password policies. So I don't know if it's really the best idea to try to go into add-cedit and try to configure all of this and try to determine this. But again, with the right tool, it actually becomes pretty easy. Now, the tool that I'm going to show you here, well, first of all, let me say secpoll doesn't report on this. But if you use the right tool, let's say AD Manager Plus, and you go to your AD reports, user reports, all users, and you generate a report, and you make sure that the column for the PSO applied shows up, you can see right here for all of your users if they have a password setting object. The PSO is fine-grained password policies. If you have any of them in place, they'll show up here. So instead of looking at the fine-grained password policy configurations, what we want to make sure is the right users have the correct configurations. A tool like AD Manager Plus can easily show you the PSO that's applied for the reporting aspect of this. So again, making sure that you have the right report is extremely important, okay? So now that we have the correct report in place for our password policy, we need to analyze. And we need to analyze not just for compliance. You need to consider all of the password requirements. You need to consider security of the passwords. You need to look at hacking of passwords and the technologies available, such as rainbow tables, pass the hash, pass the ticket, all of these complicated things to really look at what kind of a password you should have. Now, I don't have an hour to go over all those details, Certainly, if you go to our blog, you can look at some of our views on passwords and how to set them up properly. But once you have reported, analyzed what you need, now you need to configure. You can either update the default domain policy, which I don't recommend. What I recommend is you create a new GPO and make it higher in the hierarchy of GPOs at the domain level, and that's where you're going to set your password policy. If you want multiple password policies in the same domain, well, my recommendation is you use a tool like AD Self-Service Plus that we have for Manage Engine, because now you can actually get much better control over having multiple password policies in a single domain based on users that are in an OU, and that's what AD Self-Service Plus can do. So that could be the configuration piece. So now that we've reported, analyzed, and configured, we now have the password policy that we want in place. Just like I mentioned before, if we just configure this, we'll never know if it changes. However, if we go into another tool, such as AD Audit Plus, AD Audit Plus allows us to track all changes to Active Directory. And I can generate reports that show me if a password policy changes. So the password settings object would be Finegrained password policy. And see if I can find it in my list here, my password changes. I don't know if I have a default. This is just my reports here. Oh, password changes. Okay. So obviously in the last 24 hours I don't have any. How about the last 6 months? Absolutely. You will see here that on May 24th in this GPO, I had a change to the password policy. And I can actually look at the details here. So this becomes extremely important for you to have this information. This becomes your monitoring piece. Well, because the password policy is so important, we not only want to monitor the change, we want to establish an alert. And you'll notice here that if my domain password policy changes, I can actually have an email sent to different administrators telling them, wait a minute, the password policy changed. So this is how we do the 5 steps. Okay? Now, let's review. With the password policy, we can run secpol.msc to get the domain GPO password policy, and we can use AD Manager Plus per user to be able to get who has the fine-grained password policy set up. We then configure. One option for the configuration would be AD Self-Service Plus. Then we need to monitor and alert using AD Audit Plus. So this means that if you don't receive an email alert that the password policy has changed, you know that it's still correct. See how that works? Excellent. So let's move on to the next topic. Let's talk about authentication protocols. Now, I just got done going to the Microsoft event, Ignite, in Atlanta last week, and this was talked about a lot. The fact that these authentication protocols for Microsoft, LAN Manager and NTLM, are extremely insecure. So what we need to do is we need to make sure that they're configured properly. Now, there are 2 settings with regard to LAN Manager and NTLM. Both of them are configured through group policy. Now, what did we learn in our first topic about GPO reports? That's right, we can't trust them. So what we need to do is we need to run a report to make sure that the authentication protocols are correct. How do we do that for our domain controllers? Well, we're going to go back to our standby tool, seccpol.msc, again, built into every Windows machine. Now we're going to come under local policies, security options, and down here towards the bottom, we have a couple of settings with regard to LAN Manager. Now, the first one is whether or not the LAN Manager hash is going to be stored. You will notice that this is enabled to not store the hash, which is what we want. So enabled in this configuration is correct. So we verify that that is correct. Then we look at the LAN manager authentication level. You will notice it's set to send NTLM v2 only. Now, this may seem like it's a good setting because it's only sending NTLM v2 and it's not mentioning LAN manager or NTLM. However, if we go to a root GPO setting and we look at the possibilities, so here into my security settings, my local policies security options, if we come down here to LAN manager authentication level, you will see that there are 6 potential options. So this is the analysis piece. We know that right now we've reported it's set to here. The analysis, we have to know what settings are possible. You will see that there are 2 that say refuse. Well, if this one doesn't say refuse, does it allow LAN manager and NTLM? The answer is yes. This is the default right here for Active Directory. We need to set it to one of these 2 settings. So this is that analysis piece. The reporting piece is here in SecPol, S-E-C-P-O-L. In order for us to make the correct configuration, we have to know what's possible, and we have to know if it is possible to set it to this value. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, we have multiple authentication protocols, right? We have Kerberos, NTLM v2, NTLM, and LAN manager. When users log on to Active Directory, they're using Kerberos 99.9% of the time. When users are accessing resources, typically they're going to use Kerberos or NTLM v2. Then when are NTLM and LAN manager used? Do I even need them? I can't answer that for you. You have to go in and make that decision based on analysis. Let me help you with that analysis. My experience has shown that the times you're using LAN manager and NTLM are for your service accounts for applications. So let's say, for example, that I go back to my environment and I run services.msc. And inside of my services, you will see that I have a user configured right here, Derek. Well, Derek is running as a service for a service. Okay, it's a service account for a service. This might use LAN manager or NTLM. I don't know. How do I determine that? That's a good question. Well, we now need to run reports on if we're using LAN manager and NTLM. I'm going to give you 2 solutions for this. Solution 1, if you go into group policy provides the controls around setting up information regarding LAN manager and NTLM. If you come under your local policies, security options, Microsoft has added the ability for you to audit NTLM authentication. Notice it right here, okay? If you configure this, the resulting log will show up inside of the event viewer under your applications and services logs, Microsoft, Windows, NTLM. And you will notice here that I actually have NTLM running. So someone is authenticating using NTLM. So this is your transaction log that you know that you're using LAN manager or NTLM. You could also use a tool like AD Audit Plus. And in AD Audit Plus, under reports, you could look at your user logon reports. And for this activity, so let's say that I go to the last year. Oops, sorry, I forgot to add in my right user here. So if I do Derek, and I look at Derek over the last year, you will see that I have the ability to view certain information about these user logon activities. So I'm looking at Derek. Here I have service logon service. Notice this right here. This says Kerberos ticket. I might actually have NTLM or LAN manager. This is another way for you to look at this. Okay? Now, because of the power of AD Audit, you can actually come in here and you can look at NTLM to see if you have any NTLM. And I do not have any NTLM here. Okay? So all I'm saying is, depending on which accounts are using LAN Manager and which aren't, you're going to receive these certain entries. Okay? Now Derek isn't the one that was using LAN Manager. That's why it's not showing up. But if you look at both of these reports together, if you look at the ability to look at the event viewer using the audit of NTLM, and then use a tool such as AD Audit Plus, you can actually analyze whether or not you're using LAN Manager and NTLM. So that's the analysis piece. Now you need to configure to make sure that you have the most secure configuration. If you have service accounts that are using LAN Manager, you can't disable LAN Manager. You first of all have to update that service to not use LAN Manager or NTLM. Okay? It's a very important point here. You cannot just disable LAN Manager and NTLM. It will break that service from running if the service account needs it. That's why you have to do the analysis. But now that you have it configured, using the same settings for the monitoring and alerting, you now can actually set it up to get information out alerted to you if you use that authentication protocol. So these are the ways that we make sure that we configure, and then once it's configured, you monitor and alert to make sure that it never changes. Let's look at a third example. We've looked at passwords, authentication protocols, and now let's look at resource access. With regard to resource access, we're really talking about files and folders. Which files and folders? Well, we want to focus on those files and folders that have high profile, that are high risk. If something is modified or changed in one of these files, that could cause a loss of money to the organization, or press, bad press, financials, human resources, intellectual property. So what we need to do is we need to run a report on the access for files and folders, the access control list. Now, let's go to our operating system, and let's go to the folder structure, and you will notice here that I have a folder called Audit Docs, and I have a folder called Corp Data. Okay? Now, in my Corp Data, I could go to Properties, Security, and here is a view of my access control list. But we all know that I can't resize this. So how do I get a report of this? Because this is, and no matter what I do editing, it doesn't give me the ability to resize and get something that I can use. So I have to use a tool to get the report. Now, if we use a built-in tool, I can use a tool like iCackles. So this tool, iCackles, gives you the ability to view that particular folder's security. Now, the way the tool works is you run iCackles, ACLS, and you do C:\corp data. So you will notice that I am actually getting that list and the permissions so that I can actually run a report on this. Now, if you want to know what these little things mean, you simply type iCackles, and it gives you the little cheat sheet, and you can print this out. That way you know exactly what these mean. So now I have a report that I know who has access. But in some cases, like finance managers, I don't know who has membership in finance managers. So I'm going to have to analyze the report. The analysis here for resource access means that I have to go in and find out who has membership in these groups. Well, take administrators, for example. If I go back to Active Directory, I go to administrators, members, I could take a screenshot of this. But I need to know all the users that have membership and administrators. This doesn't tell me, correct? It tells me Derek and James Bond have membership, but it also has domain admins. This is a group. So that means that I have nested groups. How do I get the members of nested groups in a report? Because I don't want to have to string along, 10, 20, 30 different screen captures to get just one list of users. Well, I want to get users recursively that have membership in groups. How do I do that? Well, I'm going to give you two options. Option one is you can actually use PowerShell. Now, I can use the Active Directory module for PowerShell. Here, I can look at, let's see, I'm going to do get help on AD group, and you'll notice that I have get AD group member. So if I do get AD member for administrators, and I do this recursive, it's going to give me a list of all the users, even users that are in nested groups like Gerald and Tom, as a list. Now, I think this list is kind of ugly, right? It's not very pleasant. And if I give this to an auditor, they won't understand. So I would have to filter this. Now, this is one option. I prefer this option better. AD Manager Plus, AD Reports, Group Reports, Group Members. I want to look at the details so I can get users and groups. And I want to select the administrators right there. So click, 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 generate. These are all of my users that are in that list. It's the same as what we did in PowerShell. But now to get a report, I simply export to a PDF and I'm done. I think this is a little bit easier and a little bit cleaner than running PowerShell. But again, just know the tools that you have and which tool is best for you to generate the correct report. Okay? Now, you can also use a tool like AD Manager Plus to actually view the reports, to look at NTFS reports. So if I want to look at permissions on a folder, I can come over here, and if that folder is shared, I can look at that. So let's say that I come in here and I go to server 100, and I know that my audit docs is actually shared. So I generate this, and now I have a list of all of the objects, users, groups, and computers that have permissions, and I can look at the permissions that are on that particular folder. Just another way to view a report of who has access to which resource. So with resources, you can use iCackles for newer operating systems, xCackles in XP 2003, or even AD Manager. This is going to show you users and groups. For your groups, you have to get them recursively. So to analyze, you can use PowerShell or AD Manager Plus, and then you go and configure. But once you have the correct permissions in place, you need to make sure they stay in place. How do we monitor and alert when permissions change? AD Audit Plus. In AD Audit Plus, you simply come in and you set it up to where, for the file audit, you can configure the servers, and now you will know when anything is modified, even the folder permissions change. This is the power of a tool like this. And I'm hoping that you're seeing that the configuration gets you so far, but when it comes down to the reality of looking at changes, it is impossible for you as an admin to know when these things change without monitoring and alerting. And it's essential that you know when these things change. And if you look at all of the alerts that I have set up, you will see that I have alerts set up for all those critical security areas that I have on our security hardening site, right? So I have ACLs for OUs, GPO permission change. I want to know if an admin group changes, if user rights change, if service accounts are modified. All of these things are part of this security hardening site, which I showed you back here. So if I go back to our security hardening site, you'll see all these areas. This is the tie. This is what it's all about. So this is a way for you to actually see what's going on, but you have to follow the 5 steps. The 5 steps are part of the next generation security hardening, and you have to do it for all of your security areas. We gave you examples for passwords and password policies, authentication protocols, and resource access. But you also have to do it for groups, for service accounts, for privileged access. All of these areas are critical that you set up the correct security and then you monitor and alert. So hopefully this gave you insight. So where do you go from here? Well, if you have any questions about this webinar or the contents of the webinar, please email me or someone else at the Managing Active Directory. They've been on the back end helping answer your questions, and I want to thank them for that. They really help me out when I do these webinars, and they engage in your questions. And you know, any of us can answer these questions for you. We also want you to look at the security hardening site. Look at our blog. Our blog really is a way to get information to you. You can also look at some of my older articles on Windows Security and WindowsNetworking.com. And we're constantly adding resources. We're also constantly doing seminars around the world. And we still have quite a few seminars left this year. I actually leave from Stockholm and I'm heading over to Poland. After Poland, I will be in Italy, I'll be in the Netherlands, I'll be in London. So, you know, we still have some seminars that you can still come to us, engage with us, and see the solutions that we have. We really try to give you insight and solutions, not just for our products, but really as an overall Active Directory community. So with that, that finishes out our webinar. Again, for myself and everyone on the Active Directory Solutions team, we want to thank you so much for your time. If you do have any additional questions, you can send those to me or anyone at the events team, and we'd be more than happy to help you with that. I'm going to send you on your way, so you have a great rest of your day and get things done. And for Derek Melber and the rest of the Active Directory Solutions team, we send a thank you and a great day to you.